Among the vast tapestry of human stories, certain tales have captured the collective imagination more than others, resonating across cultures and eras. One such enduring mystery is the legend of the lost city of Atlantis, a fabled civilization, said to have thrived in unparalleled splendor before vanishing into the depths of the sea. This enigmatic story, first mentioned by the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, continues to intrigue scholars, adventurers, and dreamers alike, sparking debates about its origins and fueling countless theories about its possible location. The allure of Atlantis lies not only in its mystery but also in its ability to embody humanity, its eternal quest for knowledge, discovery, and the search for truths hidden just beyond our reach. So what makes Atlantis different from other ancient mysteries? Why has this particular lost civilization captured our imaginations for over 24 centuries? And perhaps most importantly, in an age of advanced technology and sophisticated archaeological methods, are we any closer to separating fact from fiction? Today, we're going to dig deep into one of history's most enduring mysteries. We'll examine the original source of the Atlantis story, explore the latest archaeological discoveries and scientific theories, and attempt to answer the question that has puzzled scholars and dreamers alike. Was Atlantis real, or is it simply one of the greatest fictional stories ever told? To understand the mystery of Atlantis, we must begin where it all started, in the mind of one of history's greatest philosophers. Around 360 BCE in ancient Athens, Plato was writing what would become two of his most famous dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias. It was in these works that the world first heard the tale of Atlantis, a mighty island nation that had supposedly existed 9,000 years before Plato's time. But Plato didn't present Atlantis as fiction. According to his account, the story came from Solon, one of Athens' most revered lawgivers, who had traveled to Egypt around 590 BCE there. Egyptian priests in the city of Sais had told Solon about this ancient civilization, translating the account from hieroglyphic records that were supposedly thousands of years old. The only primary sources for Atlantis are Plato's dialogues, Timaeus and Crete. All other mentions of the island are based on them, a fact that immediately raises questions about the story's authenticity. If Atlantis were real, wouldn't other ancient civilizations have recorded encounters with such a powerful empire? In Plato's account, Atlantis was no ordinary city. It was described as a vast island, larger than Libya and Asia combined, located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which is now known as the Strait of Gibraltar. The civilization that inhabited this island was supposedly founded by Poseidon, the Greek god of the sea, who fell in love with a mortal woman named Cleito. Poseidon fell in love with a mortal girl named Cleito, and they had a number of children, the first of which was named Atlas, who inherited the kingdom and passed it on to his firstborn for many generations. The physical description of Atlantis was remarkably detailed. Plato described a city built in concentric circles, alternating between land and water. At the center stood a magnificent temple dedicated to Poseidon, made of silver and gold, with walls covered in precious metals. The island was rich in natural resources, particularly a mysterious metal called onyx, which was said to gleam with a reddish light and was considered almost as valuable as gold. The Atlanteans themselves were portrayed as a highly advanced civilization. They had developed sophisticated irrigation systems, built impressive harbors, and created a powerful navy that allowed them to establish an empire stretching across the Mediterranean. Their society was organized according to strict laws supposedly handed down by Poseidon himself, and for many generations, they lived in harmony and prosperity. But power, as Plato tells it, eventually corrupted the Atlanteans. As generations passed, their divine heritage became diluted, and they grew increasingly materialistic and aggressive. They began to wage war against other nations, including ancient Athens. It was then that Zeus, the king of the gods, decided to punish the Atlanteans for their hubris. In a single day and night, the entire island was swallowed by the sea, disappearing forever beneath the waves. This dramatic ending serves a clear moral purpose in Plato's narrative. The destruction of Atlantis represents the consequences of moral decay and the pursuit of power over wisdom. This has led many scholars to argue that Atlantis was never intended to be taken as historical fact, but rather as a philosophical allegory designed to illustrate Plato's ideas about ideal governance and the dangers of corruption. The context in which Plato wrote about Atlantis supports this interpretation. The dialogues were written during a tumultuous time in Athenian history, shortly after the city's disastrous defeat in the Peloponnesian War, and during a period when Athens was considering the ambitious but ultimately catastrophic Sicilian expedition. Critias ironically relates a story of Atlantis' imperial hubris at a time in history when Athens was planning the Sicilian expedition. The parallels between Atlantis' imperial overreach and Athens' own military ambitions would not have been lost on contemporary readers. Furthermore, Plato is known for using fictional narratives to convey philosophical truths. His famous allegory of the cave, for instance, uses an imaginary scenario to explore the nature of knowledge and reality. The Republic itself, where Plato outlines his vision of an ideal state, is presented as a theoretical construct rather than a blueprint for an actual society. Yet the story of Atlantis differed from these other philosophical allegories in one crucial respect. Plato presented it as historical fact. He provided specific details about dates, locations, and sources. He even had Critios, one of the dialogue participants, claim that the story was strange yet completely true. This has created a puzzle that has persisted for over 2 millennia. Plato presents a fictional narrative with such apparent historical specificity. Some scholars argue that Plato may have been inspired by real historical events, even if the specific details of Atlantis were invented. The Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE had seen the mysterious disappearance of several Mediterranean civilizations, including the Mycenaeans in Greece and the Sea Peoples who had terrorized Egypt and the Levant. The memory of these vanished cultures might have provided a historical kernel around which Plato constructed his narrative. Others suggest that Plato may have been drawing on knowledge of actual places and events, but transforming them for his philosophical purposes. The Minoan civilization on Crete, for instance, had been a powerful maritime empire that was devastated by the volcanic eruption of Thera. Around 1600 BCE, could Plato have taken this real historical catastrophe and enlarged it into the tale of Atlantis? The question becomes even more complex when we consider that Plato never finished the Critios dialogue. The story breaks off mid-sentence, just as Zeus is about to announce his punishment for the Atlanteans. Was this because Plato lost interest in the narrative? Or did he perhaps realize that he had created something that was being taken too literally by his contemporaries? Whatever Plato's intentions, the story of Atlantis had been unleashed upon the world, and unlike his other philosophical works, which were primarily studied by scholars and students, the tale of the lost civilization captured the popular imagination in a way that few ancient texts ever have. The appeal of Atlantis is not difficult to understand. It combines several powerful elements: a lost golden age, advanced technology, moral lessons about the dangers of corruption, and the mystery of a civilization that vanished without a trace. It speaks to our fascination with the unknown and our desire to believe that somewhere, somehow, there exists evidence of a perfect society that once thrived on Earth. But the enduring appeal of Atlantis also creates a problem for serious historical and archaeological research. The story has become so embedded in popular culture that it has generated thousands of theories, expeditions, and claims of discovery, most of which have little basis in scientific evidence. This has made it difficult to approach the subject objectively, and has led many academics to dismiss any investigation into possible historical origins of the Atlantis story. As we move forward in our exploration, it is important to keep in mind the distinction between the Atlantis of Plato's dialogues and the Atlantis of popular imagination. The former is a specific narrative with particular details and purposes. The latter is a shape-shifting legend that has been adapted and reimagined countless times over the centuries. Understanding this distinction is crucial to any serious examination of whether there might be historical truth buried within Plato's philosophical narrative. The fascination with Atlantis didn't end with Plato. Even in ancient times, scholars and writers were debating whether the lost civilization could be real. Aristotle, Plato's own student, was skeptical, famously remarking that Plato had made Atlantis disappear just as easily as he had created it. But others were more credulous, and the search for the lost city began almost immediately. During the Roman period, writers like Pliny the Elder and Plutarch discussed Atlantis as if it were a historical reality. The story gained new life during the Renaissance, when European explorers began venturing into the Atlantic Ocean. Christopher Columbus himself believed he might find traces of Atlantis in the New World, and early maps often included mysterious islands in the Atlantic that were thought to be remnants of the lost continent. The modern search for Atlantis truly began in the 19th century, driven by advances in archaeology and a growing interest in ancient civilizations. The rediscovery of Troy by Heinrich Schliemann in the 1870s had shown that legendary cities described in ancient literature could indeed be real places. If Troy existed, many reasoned, why not Atlantis? One of the most influential early theories was proposed by Ignatius Donnelly in his 1882 book Atlantis, The Antediluvian World. Donnelly argued that Atlantis had been a real civilization that served as the common source for the myths and cultures of both the Old and New Worlds. He pointed to similarities between ancient Egyptian and American civilizations as evidence that both had been influenced by Atlantean refugees who had survived the catastrophe. Donnelly's theory was wildly popular but scientifically problematic. His parallels between different cultures were often superficial, and he ignored the vast chronological and geographical distances that separated the civilizations he was trying to connect. Nevertheless, his work established many of the themes that would dominate Atlantis research for the next century: the search for archaeological evidence, the attempt to connect ancient cultures, and the belief that Atlantis had been the source of advanced prehistoric technology. The early 20th century saw a proliferation of Atlantis theories, each placing the lost civilization in a different location. Some scholars argued for a location in the Mediterranean, pointing to the advanced Minoan civilization on Crete as a possible inspiration for Plato's story. Others looked to the Atlantic Ocean itself, proposing that Atlantis had been located on the mid-Atlantic ridge, which had supposedly sunk beneath the waves due to geological activity. One of the most intriguing theories emerged in the 1960s, when Greek archaeologist Spyridon Marinatos began excavating the Bronze Age site of Akrotiri on the island of Santorini. Marinatos discovered a sophisticated civilization that had been preserved under volcanic ash, much like Pompeii. The site showed evidence of advanced urban planning, sophisticated art, and extensive trade networks throughout the Mediterranean. The timing seemed perfect. The volcanic eruption that destroyed Akrotiri occurred around 1600 BCE during the height of Minoan civilization. The catastrophe was massive, generating tsunamis that devastated coastal areas throughout the eastern Mediterranean. Could this real historical event have been the inspiration for Plato's tale of Atlantis? The Santorini theory gained widespread acceptance and seemed to offer a satisfying solution to the Atlantis mystery. Here was a real advanced civilization that had been destroyed by a natural catastrophe, just as Plato had described. The concentric circular layout of Santorini's caldera even seemed to match Plato's description of Atlantis' ring shape. However, closer examination revealed significant problems with the Santorini-Atlantis connection. The chronology was wrong. Plato placed Atlantis 9,000 years before his own time, around 9,600 BCE, not 1600 BCE. The geography was wrong. Santorini is in the Aegean Sea, not beyond the Pillars of Hercules as Plato specified, and the scale was wrong. Santorini was a single island, not the vast continent that Plato described. Despite these discrepancies, the Santorini theory remained popular because it offered something that purely speculative theories could not: real archaeological evidence of an advanced Bronze Age civilization that had been destroyed by a natural catastrophe. Even if the details didn't match perfectly, the basic pattern seemed to align with Plato's narrative. Meanwhile, other researchers were pursuing different approaches to the Atlantis mystery. Some focused on geological evidence, looking for signs of sunken landmasses in the Atlantic Ocean. The discovery of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge initially seemed promising, as it suggested that large areas of the ocean floor had indeed been above sea level in the past. However, geological dating showed that any such land bridge had disappeared millions of years ago, long before human civilization existed. Others took a more anthropological approach, studying flood myths and legends of lost civilizations from around the world. They noted that cultures as diverse as the Mesopotamians, Indians, and Native Americans all had stories of great floods that had destroyed earlier civilizations. Could these myths preserve memories of real prehistoric catastrophes, perhaps including the destruction of Atlantis? The problem with this approach was that flood myths are nearly universal in human cultures, often arising independently as explanations for local geological features or as metaphors for moral and spiritual purification. The existence of similar myths in different cultures doesn't necessarily point to a common historical origin. As the 20th century progressed, the search for Atlantis became increasingly sophisticated, incorporating new technologies and methods. Underwater archaeology developed as a discipline, allowing researchers to explore submerged sites that might contain evidence of lost civilizations. Satellite imagery and sonar mapping revealed previously unknown structures on the ocean floor, some of which were initially thought to be artificial constructions. One of the most significant developments was the recognition that sea levels had been much lower during the last ice age, which ended around 11,000 years ago. Large areas of what is now the ocean floor had been dry land during this period, potentially supporting human settlements. When the ice melted and sea levels rose, these coastal civilizations would have been submerged, possibly preserving archaeological evidence under hundreds of feet of water. This realization opened up new possibilities for Atlantis research. If Plato's chronology were taken seriously, placing Atlantis around 9,600 BC, then the civilization would have existed during the final stages of the Ice Age. The flooding that destroyed Atlantis might not have been a sudden catastrophe, but rather the gradual rise in sea levels that accompanied the end of the glacial period. Several underwater expeditions were launched to investigate this possibility. In the 1960s and 1970s, researchers used submarines and underwater cameras to explore suspicious formations on the ocean floor near the Bahamas, off the coast of Spain, and in the Mediterranean. Some of these expeditions claimed to have found evidence of artificial structures, including walls, roads, and even pyramids. However, most of these claims failed to withstand scientific scrutiny. What appeared to be artificial structures often turned out to be natural rock formations shaped by erosion and sedimentation. The famous Bimini Road in the Bahamas, for instance, was initially thought to be a man-made causeway, but was later determined to be a natural formation of limestone blocks. The challenge of distinguishing between natural and artificial underwater formations became a recurring theme in Atlantis research. The ocean environment is harsh on archaeological remains, and centuries of wave action, sedimentation, and marine growth can obscure or destroy evidence of human activity. Even genuine archaeological sites can be difficult to identify and excavate underwater. Despite these challenges, legitimate underwater archaeology has made remarkable discoveries that demonstrate the potential for finding evidence of submerged civilizations. The discovery of prehistoric cave paintings and underwater caverns off the coast of France, for instance, shows that significant archaeological sites can indeed be preserved beneath the sea. These discoveries have encouraged continued research into the possibility that some kernel of historical truth might underlie the Atlantis story. While few serious archaeologists believe that Plato's description is literally accurate, many acknowledge that the story might preserve memories of real prehistoric civilizations that were lost to rising sea levels. The late 20th and early 21st centuries have seen the emergence of new technologies that have revolutionized the search for underwater archaeological sites. Side scans, sonar, multibeam, and remotely operated vehicles now allow researchers to map and explore the ocean floor with unprecedented precision. Satellite imagery and GPS technology have made it possible to relocate and study previously discovered sites with greater accuracy. These technological advances have led to a new wave of Atlantis research, with expeditions using cutting-edge equipment to investigate promising underwater formations. In 2023, the same team of divers, along with archaeologists, returned to make a fascinating discovery that may be linked to Atlantis. The divers discovered wall-like circular structures ranging from 16 to 1,400 feet tall. Though such claims require careful verification through peer-reviewed research, the modern search for Atlantis has also been influenced by advances in our understanding of ancient history and prehistory. The discovery of sophisticated prehistoric sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, which dates to around 9,600 BC, has shown that complex civilizations existed much earlier than previously thought. This has lent some credibility to the possibility that Plato's chronology for Atlantis might not be entirely fictional. Similarly, growing evidence for the impact of climate change and natural catastrophes on prehistoric civilizations has made the destruction scenario in the Atlantis story seem more plausible. The Younger Dryas period, a brief return to Ice Age conditions around 10,800 BCE, was associated with massive environmental changes that would have devastated coastal civilizations. Some researchers have proposed that this event might be the historical basis for the Atlantis catastrophe. However, it's important to note that despite decades of searching and numerous claimed discoveries, no archaeological evidence has been found that definitively proves the existence of Atlantis as described by Plato. Despite extensive speculation and numerous theories, archaeological discoveries or credible historical records have yet to be found that definitively prove the existence of Atlantis. This lack of concrete evidence has led many researchers to focus on the question of whether Plato might have been inspired by real historical events. Even if the specific details of Atlantis were fictional, this approach has proven more fruitful, leading to important discoveries about prehistoric civilizations and the impact of natural catastrophes on ancient societies. As we'll see in the next chapter, recent archaeological discoveries have revealed that the prehistoric world was far more complex and sophisticated than previously imagined, lending some credibility to the idea that advanced civilizations might have existed in antiquity, even if they weren't exactly as Plato described. The field of archaeology has been revolutionized over the past century, and nowhere is this more evident than in our understanding of prehistoric civilizations. Discoveries that would have seemed impossible just a few decades ago have forced us to reconsider what we thought we knew about the capabilities of ancient peoples. While none of these discoveries directly prove the existence of Atlantis, they have shown that sophisticated civilizations existed much earlier and were far more advanced than previously believed. Perhaps the most startling example is Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey. When German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt began excavating the site in the 1990s, he uncovered something that challenged everything archaeologists thought they knew about the Neolithic period. The site consists of massive stone circles containing intricately carved pillars, some weighing up to 20 tons. The sophistication of the construction and artwork rivals that of much later civilizations. Yet radiocarbon dating has shown that Göbekli Tepe was built around 9600 BCE, making it over 11,000 years old. This date is particularly significant because it coincides almost exactly with Plato's timeline for the destruction of Atlantis. While this is likely a coincidence, it demonstrates that complex civilizations with advanced architectural capabilities did exist during the period when Atlantis was supposedly destroyed. The builders of Göbekli Tepe were able to quarry, transport, and precisely position massive stone blocks at a time when most archaeologists had assumed that humans were simple hunter-gatherers living in small nomadic bands. The implications of Göbekli Tepe extend far beyond its impressive architecture. The site appears to have been a religious or ceremonial center that would have required the coordination of large numbers of people over extended periods. This suggests the existence of sophisticated social organization and possibly even proto-born settlements in the surrounding area. Recent surveys using ground-penetrating radar have revealed that the excavated portion of Göbekli Tepe represents only a small fraction of a much larger complex, with dozens of additional stone circles still buried underground. Similar discoveries have been made at other prehistoric sites around the world. In Peru, the Caral civilization flourished around 3500 BC, featuring large pyramid complexes, sophisticated irrigation systems, and evidence of long-distance trade networks. In Malta, the megalithic temples of Cogantija date to around 3600 BC, demonstrating advanced engineering techniques that rival those of the later Egyptian pyramids. These discoveries have forced archaeologists to acknowledge that the development of human civilization was not as linear or predictable as once thought. Instead of a steady progression from simple hunter-gatherers to complex societies, the archaeological record now reveals a pattern of early experimentation with sophisticated technologies and social organization, followed by periods of collapse and rebuilding. This pattern has particular relevance to the Atlantis story, because it suggests that advanced civilizations could indeed have existed in prehistoric times, only to disappear without leaving obvious traces for later civilizations to discover. The builders of Göbekli Tepe, for instance, deliberately buried their site around 8000 BCE for reasons that remain mysterious. If not for modern archaeological techniques, this remarkable civilization might have remained unknown forever. The question of lost civilizations has also been informed by advances in underwater archaeology. As sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age, vast areas of coastal land were submerged, potentially taking archaeological evidence with them. The Dogrillan region, which once connected Britain to continental Europe, is estimated to have supported a population of hundreds of thousands of people before being gradually flooded around 6000 BCE. Recent underwater surveys in the North Sea have discovered evidence of human occupation in what is now including stone tools, animal bones, and the remains of prehistoric forests. Similar discoveries have been made off the coasts of India, where submerged cities dating back several thousand years have been found in the Gulf of Khomhat and near. While these sites are not old enough to be Atlantis, they demonstrate that significant archaeological remains can indeed be preserved underwater for thousands of years. One of the most intriguing underwater discoveries was made off the coast of Japan, where the Yonaguni monument has sparked intense debate among archaeologists. The massive stone structure discovered in the 19th features what appear to be carved steps, terraces, and geometric patterns. Some researchers argue that the monument is entirely natural, formed by geological processes, while others contend that it shows clear evidence of human modification. The debate over Yonaguni illustrates one of the central challenges in underwater archaeology, distinguishing between natural formations and human-made structures. Ocean environments can create remarkably geometric patterns through erosion and sedimentation, making it difficult to identify genuine archaeological sites. This problem is compounded by the fact that any artificial structures would have been heavily modified by thousands of years of marine processes. Despite these challenges, legitimate underwater archaeological sites continue to be discovered and excavated. The Bronze Age settlement of Atlantis, submerged off the coast of Israel around 7,000 years ago, has provided detailed insights into prehistoric life. The site includes the remains of houses, wells, and even a stone circle that may have had ceremonial significance. Most remarkably, the underwater environment has preserved organic materials that would have long since decayed on land, including wooden artifacts and human remains. The preservation conditions at Atlatam have allowed archaeologists to reconstruct daily life in unprecedented detail. Analysis of human remains has revealed information about diet, health, and even the causes of death of individual and plant remains have provided insights into agriculture and food preparation, while animal bones have illuminated hunting and domestication practices. These discoveries demonstrate that underwater archaeology has the potential to provide exceptionally well-preserved evidence of prehistoric civilizations. However, they also highlight the rarity of such sites and the specific conditions required for their preservation. The vast majority of underwater formations that are initially thought to be archaeological sites turn out to be natural phenomena. Recent technological advances have greatly improved our ability to identify and study underwater archaeological sites. Multi-beam sonar systems can now create detailed three-dimensional maps of the ocean floor, revealing structures and formations that would be invisible to traditional survey methods. Autonomous underwater vehicles, equipped with high-resolution cameras, can explore and document sites and environments too dangerous or remote for human divers. These technologies have led to some remarkable discoveries that, while not related to Atlantis, demonstrate the potential for finding evidence of lost civilizations. In the Black Sea, researchers have discovered remarkably well-preserved shipwrecks dating back over 2,000 years, preserved by the anoxic conditions in the deep water. Off the coast of Egypt, the submerged cities of Thonis Heracleion and Canopus have been extensively mapped and excavated, revealing sophisticated urban centers that were lost to rising sea levels and earthquakes. The ongoing excavation of Thonis Heracleion is particularly relevant to Atlantis research, because it demonstrates how even well-documented historical cities can be completely lost beneath the waves. The city was mentioned by ancient historians like Herodotus and was known to have been an important port at the mouth of the Nile. Yet for over 1,000 years, its location remained a mystery until underwater archaeologists rediscovered it in the 1990s. The rediscovery of Thonis, combining analysis of ancient texts with geological surveys and underwater exploration, the city had not only been submerged by rising sea levels, but had also been buried under layers of sediment deposited by the Nile River. Without modern technology, it would have remained lost indefinitely. This example illustrates both the potential for finding lost civilizations and the challenges involved in doing so. If a well-documented historical city like Thonisir, it's certainly possible that other ancient settlements remain undiscovered. However, the discovery also required specific favorable conditions. The city had to be in a location where preservation was possible, and researchers needed historical references to guide their search. The same principles apply to the search for Atlantis. If such a civilization existed, it would need to have been located in an environment where archaeological remains could survive for thousands of years. It would also help to have some additional historical or geographical clues beyond Plato's account to guide the search. Some researchers have focused on identifying natural disasters that might have inspired the Atlantis story. The volcanic eruption that destroyed Thera around 1600 BCE remains the most commonly cited example. Despite the chronological and geographical discrepancies with Plato's account, the scale of this catastrophe was enormous, generating tsunamis that reached heights of over 100 feet and spreading volcanic ash across the eastern Mediterranean. Recent research has revealed that the Thera eruption may have been even more catastrophic than previously thought. Analysis of ice cores and tree rings has shown evidence of global climate impacts, with temperatures dropping significantly in the years following the eruption. This suggests that the volcanic winter caused by the eruption may have contributed to crop failures and social collapse across a wide region. While the Thera eruption occurred too recently to be the historical basis for Atlantis, it demonstrates the kind of catastrophic event that could indeed destroy an entire civilization in a short period of time. Other prehistoric catastrophes have been identified that occur closer to Plato's timeline, including the Younger Impact hypothesis, which proposes that a comet or asteroid impact around 1800 BC caused rapid climate change and the extinction of many large mammal species in North America. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis remains controversial, but it illustrates how natural catastrophes during the end of the Ice Age could have devastated prehistoric civilizations. If advanced societies did exist around 9600 BCE, as suggested by sites like Göbekli Tepe, they would have been vulnerable to the dramatic environmental changes that characterized this period. Recent discoveries have also shed new light on the capabilities of prehistoric seafaring peoples. The colonization of Australia around 50,000 years ago required sophisticated boat-building technology and navigation skills, demonstrating that even very ancient peoples were capable of remarkable maritime achievements. Similarly, the Polynesian expansion across the Pacific, which began around 3,000 years ago, involved voyages of thousands of miles across open ocean using traditional navigation techniques. These examples show that prehistoric peoples were capable of far more sophisticated maritime activities than once believed. This lends some credibility to Plato's description of Atlantis as a powerful maritime empire, even if the specific details remain questionable. Archaeologists have uncovered the remains of the legendary medieval town of Rungholt, believed to have been engulfed by the sea during the St. Marcellus's flood in 1362, demonstrating that real towns and cities have indeed been lost to the sea throughout history. While Rungholt is much more recent than Plato's Atlantis, it shows that the basic scenario of a coastal civilization being destroyed by flooding is not only possible but has actually occurred multiple times throughout history. The discovery of Rungholt required sophisticated underwater survey techniques and careful analysis of historical records. This provides a model for how genuine archaeological evidence of lost civilizations can be found and verified. The key difference between discoveries like Rungholt and claimed discoveries of Atlantis is that the former can be corroborated through multiple lines of evidence, including historical documents, geological data, and archaeological remains. As we move forward in our investigation, it is important to distinguish between discoveries that genuinely expand our understanding of prehistoric civilizations and claims that are based on speculation or wishful thinking. While the archaeological record has revealed remarkable evidence of ancient sophistication, it has not yet produced the kind of unambiguous proof that would be required to confirm the existence of Atlantis as described by Plato. The search for Atlantis has been greatly informed by advances in geology and earth sciences. Understanding how the planet's surface has changed over thousands of years is crucial to evaluating claims about lost civilizations, particularly those that supposedly disappeared beneath the sea. Modern geological research has revealed a dynamic Earth where continents drift, sea levels fluctuate dramatically, and catastrophic events can reshape entire regions in relatively short periods of time. One of the most significant geological insights relevant to Atlantis research is the extent of sea level changes during and after the last ice age. At the height of the glacial period, around 20,000 years ago, global sea levels were approximately 400 feet lower than they are today. Vast areas that are now underwater were dry land, potentially supporting human settlements and even sophisticated civilizations. The process of deglaciation was not gradual and uniform. Instead, it occurred in fits and starts, with periods of rapid melting punctuated by temporary reversals. Some of these changes happened remarkably quickly by geological standards. Meltwater Pulse 1A, which occurred around 14,600 years ago, saw sea levels rise by 40 to 60 feet in just a few centuries. An even more dramatic event, Meltwater Pulse 1b, may have caused sea levels to rise by up to 25 feet in less than 500 years, around 11,300 years ago. These rapid changes would have been catastrophic for any coastal civilizations that existed at the time. Settlements that had been built on river deltas or coastal plains would have been submerged with little warning. Even communities located well inland could have been affected if they were situated in river valleys that became flooded as sea levels rose. The timing of these events is particularly intriguing when considered alongside Plato's chronology for Atlantis. The final major pulse of deglaciation occurred around 8,000 to 6,000 years ago, which is still much more recent than Plato's date of 9600 BC. However, the Younger Dryas period, which lasted from approximately 10,800 to 9,600 BCE, was characterized by rapid and dramatic climate changes that could have devastated prehistoric civilizations. The Younger Dryas began with a sudden return to near glacial conditions after a period of warming. Temperatures in the North Atlantic region dropped by as much as 15 degrees Celsius in just a few decades. This dramatic climate change would have caused widespread environmental disruption, including changes in precipitation patterns, the expansion of ice sheets, and the extinction of many large animal species. The cause of the Younger Dryas remains debated among scientists. The traditional explanation involves changes in ocean circulation patterns caused by the sudden release of glacial meltwater into the North Atlantic. This influx of fresh water could have disrupted the Gulf Stream and other ocean currents that help regulate global climate. However, a more controversial theory suggests that the Younger Dryas was triggered by the impact of a comet or asteroid around 10,800 BCE. Proponents of this hypothesis point to evidence of unusual concentrations of rare earth elements, microscopic diamonds, and other materials that they argue could only have been created by an extraterrestrial impact. They also note that many large animal species in North America went extinct at roughly the same time, which could be consistent with a catastrophic impact event. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis remains highly controversial within the scientific community. Critics argue that the proposed evidence for an impact can be explained by other processes, and that many of the claimed markers have not been found at sites where they should be present if a large impact had occurred. However, research continues into this possibility, and some recent studies have provided additional support for the idea that some kind of catastrophic event occurred around the beginning of the Younger Dryas. If an impact event did occur around 10,800 BCE, it could potentially explain some aspects of the Atlantis story. A large impact in the ocean could have generated massive tsunamis that devastated coastal civilizations. The resulting climate changes could have made large areas uninhabitable, forcing survivors to migrate to new regions. However, it's important to note that even if such an event occurred, it would not necessarily validate Plato's specific account of Atlantis. Geological research has also revealed the existence of numerous underwater plateaus and ridges that were above sea level during the last ice age. The Doctorland region between Britain and continental Europe supported a thriving ecosystem and human population until it was gradually submerged around 6000 BCE. The Bering Land Bridge connected Asia and North America, allowing human migration between the continents. Similar land bridges existed in many other parts of the world, including between Australia and New Guinea, and between various Mediterranean islands. These submerged landscapes represent vast areas where evidence of prehistoric human activity could potentially be preserved. However, finding and excavating such sites presents enormous challenges. The ocean environment is harsh on organic materials, and centuries of sedimentation can bury archaeological remains under thick layers of mud and sand. Even when sites are discovered, the cost and technical difficulties of underwater excavation make detailed study extremely challenging. Despite these obstacles, underwater archaeology has made remarkable progress in recent decades. The development of remotely operated vehicles or OVS, autonomous underwater vehicles, AUVs, and sophisticated sonar systems has revolutionized our ability to explore the ocean floor. These technologies have revealed underwater landscapes of surprising diversity and complexity, including canyons, mountains, and plateaus that were once dry land. One area that has received particular attention from Atlantis researchers is the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, the underwater mountain range that runs down the center of the Atlantic Ocean. When the ridge was first discovered and mapped in detail during the mid-20th century, some researchers speculated that it might represent the remains of a sunken continent. The ridge does indeed contain elevated areas that were above sea level in the geological past, but dating has shown that these areas were submerged millions of years ago, long before human evolution. More promising are areas where relatively recent geological activity has created dramatic changes in sea level. The Mediterranean Sea, for instance, underwent a remarkable transformation during the Messinian salinity crisis around 5.96 to 5.33 million years ago. During this period, the connection between the Mediterranean and Atlantic was severed, causing the Mediterranean to largely dry up. When the connection was restored, the resulting flood was one of the most dramatic geological events in Earth's history. with water levels rising by hundreds of feet in just a few years. While this event occurred far too early to be connected to human civilization, it demonstrates the kind of rapid and dramatic geological changes that are possible. Similar but smaller scale events have occurred more recently. The Black Sea, for instance, may have been a much smaller freshwater lake until around 7,500 years ago, when rising sea levels caused the Mediterranean to breach the land barrier at the Bosphorus. The resulting flood would have rapidly submerged large areas of coastal land. This Black Sea flood hypothesis, proposed by marine geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman, suggests that the event may have been the historical basis for flood myths found in various cultures, including the biblical account of Noah's flood. If correct, it would represent exactly the kind of catastrophic flooding that could have inspired the Atlantis story, occurring at a time when sophisticated Neolithic cultures existed in the region. The evidence for the Black Sea flood includes underwater archaeological discoveries that appear to show the remains of a former shoreline, complete with shells and other materials that would have been deposited in shallow water. However, the hypothesis remains controversial, with some researchers arguing that the flooding was more gradual and less catastrophic than Ryan and Pittman proposed. Similar debates surround other proposed sites for catastrophic flooding events. The English Channel, which separates Britain from France, was carved out by a series of massive floods that occurred when glacial lakes burst through land barriers. The most recent and largest of these events may have occurred as recently as 160,000 years ago. Far too early to be connected to the Atlantis story, but demonstrating that such catastrophic floods are indeed possible. Volcanic activity represents another geological process that could potentially explain the sudden destruction described in the Atlantis story. The Mediterranean region has been subject to intense volcanic activity throughout its history, with major eruptions capable of causing widespread devastation. The eruption of Vesuvius in 79 CE, which destroyed Pompeii and Herculaneum, provides a well-documented example of how volcanic activity can rapidly obliterate entire cities. The much larger eruption of Thera Santorini around 1600 BCE was several times more powerful than Vesuvius, and had impacts that extended across the entire eastern Mediterranean. The eruption generated massive tsunamis, deposited ash over a vast area, and may have contributed to the collapse of the Minoan civilization on Crete. While the chronology doesn't match Plato's account, the Thera eruption demonstrates the kind of catastrophic volcanic event that could indeed destroy an island civilization. More recently, the 1883 eruption of Krakatoa in Indonesia provided a dramatic example of how volcanic activity can literally cause an island to disappear. The eruption was so violent that it destroyed most of the original island, created new islands from ejected material, and generated tsunamis that killed over 36,000 people in the surrounding region. The sound of the eruption was heard over 3,000 miles away, and the ash cloud affected global weather patterns for years. If a similar eruption had occurred in the Atlantic Ocean during prehistoric times, it could potentially have destroyed an island civilization without leaving obvious traces for later discovery. However, geological surveys of the Atlantic have not revealed evidence of such recent large-scale volcanic activity in areas where Atlantis is traditionally placed. Earthquake activity represents yet another geological process that could contribute to the sudden destruction of a coastal civilization. The Mediterranean region is seismically active due to the ongoing collision between the African and Eurasian tectonic plates. Major earthquakes in the region have repeatedly caused extensive damage to coastal cities, and several ancient cities have been lost to combinations of earthquake damage and subsequent flooding. The ancient city of Helic in Greece, for instance, was destroyed by an earthquake in 373 BCE and subsequently submerged by a tsunami. The city disappeared so completely that its location remained unknown for over 2,000 years, until underwater archaeologists rediscovered it in the 1980s. The rediscovery of Helic demonstrates that even historically documented cities can be completely lost to geological catastrophes and remain hidden for millennia. Modern geological research has also revealed the existence of massive underwater landslides that could have generated devastating tsunamis. The Storegga slide, which occurred off the coast of Norway around 8,200 years ago, involved the collapse of an area of seafloor roughly the size of Scotland. The resulting tsunami reached heights of over 60 feet along the Norwegian coast and traveled across the North Sea to reach Scotland and the Faroe Islands. Similar underwater landslides have been identified in many other parts of the world, including the Mediterranean Sea, where several large slides have occurred during the Holocene period. These events could potentially have generated tsunamis capable of devastating coastal civilizations, particularly in enclosed seas where wave energy would be concentrated. The Cumbervieja volcano on the Canary island of La Palma has been the subject of particular concern in recent years. Some researchers have suggested that a future eruption could trigger a massive landslide that would generate a tsunami capable of devastating the entire Atlantic basin. While this scenario is considered unlikely by most geologists, it illustrates the kind of catastrophic event that could theoretically cause widespread destruction along Atlantic coastlines. When we consider all of these geological processes together, it becomes clear that the Earth is capable of generating exactly the kind of catastrophic events described in the Atlantis story. Rapid sea level changes, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, tsunamis, and underwater landslides have all occurred repeatedly throughout human history and could certainly have destroyed coastal civilizations. However, the geological evidence also reveals why finding traces of such lost civilizations is extremely difficult. The same processes that could destroy a civilization also tend to obliterate archaeological evidence. Volcanic eruptions bury sites under layers of ash and lava. Tsunamis scour away surface deposits and redistribute materials over vast areas. Earthquakes fracture and displace archaeological layers. Rising sea levels submerge sites and subject them to marine erosion and sedimentation. This creates a paradox for Atlantis research. The more catastrophic the destruction, the less likely it is that recognizable archaeological remains would survive to be discovered. A civilization that was truly destroyed as suddenly and completely as Plato described would be extremely difficult to detect using conventional archaeological methods. This geological reality has important implications for how we evaluate claims about Atlantis. Any genuine evidence of such a lost civilization would need to have been preserved under very specific and favorable conditions. It would also need to be located in areas where geological processes have not completely obliterated the archaeological record. As we'll see in the next chapter, these constraints have led many researchers to focus on alternative approaches to the Atlantis mystery, including the analysis of ancient texts, the study of cultural parallels between different civilizations, and the search for indirect evidence of prehistoric advanced technologies. The search for Atlantis has generated dozens of alternative theories over the centuries, each proposing different locations, chronologies, and explanations for Plato's account. While most of these theories lack solid archaeological support, they collectively illustrate the various ways that scholars have attempted to reconcile the Atlantis story with known historical and geographical facts. Understanding these different approaches provides insight into both the enduring appeal of the Atlantis mystery and the challenges faced by researchers attempting to investigate it seriously. One of the most persistent alternative theories places Atlantis in the Americas. Building on the work of 19th-century writer Ignatius Donnelly, proponents of this theory argue that the advanced civilizations of pre-Columbian America, including the Maya, Aztec, and Inca, show evidence of influence from a common source that could have been Atlantis. They point to similarities in architecture, such as the use of massive stone blocks in pyramid construction, as well as shared mythological themes involving floods and lost civilizations. The American Atlantis theory gained renewed attention in the 20th century with the discovery of sophisticated prehistoric sites throughout the Americas. The Caral civilization in Peru, which flourished around 3500 BCE, featured large pyramid complexes and sophisticated urban planning that rivaled contemporary civilizations in Mesopotamia and Egypt. Similarly, the discovery of complex astronomical alignments at sites like Chichen Itza and Machu Picchu suggested that American civilizations possessed advanced mathematical and engineering knowledge. However, the American theory faces several significant problems. The chronology is wrong. Most advanced American civilizations developed thousands of years after Plato's proposed date for Atlantis. The geographical location doesn't match Plato's description of an island beyond the Pillars of Hercules, and the supposed cultural similarities between American and Old World civilizations can be explained by independent development rather than common origin. Moreover, modern understanding of human migration to the Americas has eliminated the need for a lost civilization to explain the origins of American cultures. Archaeological evidence clearly shows that the Americas were populated by peoples who crossed the Bering Land Bridge from Asia, bringing with them the cultural and technological foundations that would later develop into the diverse civilizations encountered by European explorers. Another popular alternative places Atlantis in Antarctica, building on the work of writer Charles Hapgood and his theory of Earth crust displacement. Hapgood proposed that the Earth's crust occasionally shifts position relative to the interior, causing continents to move rapidly to new latitudes. According to this theory, Antarctica was once located in a more temperate region and supported an advanced civilization before being displaced to its current polar position. The Antarctica theory has been popularized by writers like Graham Hancock, who argued that ice-covered ruins of an ancient civilization might still exist on the continent. Proponents point to the Peary Race map of 1513, which appears to show the coastline of Antarctica without ice cover as evidence that ancient peoples had knowledge of the continent's true geography. However, the Antarctica theory is contradicted by overwhelming geological evidence. Plate tectonics explains continental movement through slow, gradual processes that occur over millions of years, not the rapid displacements required by Hapgood's theory. Antarctica has been in its current position for millions of years and has been ice-covered for at least 34 million years, long before human evolution. The Peary Race map, meanwhile, can be explained as a compilation of existing knowledge about South American coastlines, with the supposed Antarctic features being artistic interpretations or copying errors. Some researchers have proposed that Atlantis was located in the Sahara Desert, which was much more hospitable during the early Holocene period. The Green Sahara period, which lasted from approximately 11,000 to 5,000 years ago, saw the region transformed into a landscape of lakes, rivers, and grasslands that supported diverse wildlife and human populations. As the climate dried out, this civilization could have been abandoned and eventually buried under sand dunes. The Sahara theory has some appealing aspects. The chronology is closer to Plato's account than many other theories, and there is clear evidence that the region underwent dramatic environmental changes that could have caused the collapse of any existing civilization. Satellite imagery has revealed numerous lakes and river systems that existed during the Green Sahara period, some of which could potentially have supported large settlements. However, the Sahara theory also faces significant problems. Plato specifically described Atlantis as an island surrounded by the sea, not a land-based civilization in the interior of Africa. No archaeological evidence has been found for the kind of advanced maritime civilization that Plato described, and while the Sahara did undergo dramatic climate change, the transformation was gradual rather than the sudden catastrophe described in the Atlantis story. The search for Atlantis has also led some researchers to focus on existing ancient civilizations that might have inspired Plato's account. The Minoan civilization on Crete remains the most popular candidate, despite the chronological and geographical problems discussed earlier. Proponents argue that Plato may have compressed the timeline, or that the Egyptian priests who supposedly told the story to Solon made errors in their chronological calculations. The Minoan theory is supported by several intriguing parallels with Plato's description. The Minoans were indeed a sophisticated maritime civilization with advanced architecture, art, and technology. Their capital at Naxos featured elaborate palaces with complex layouts that might have inspired Plato's description of Atlantis' circular city. The civilization was indeed destroyed by a natural catastrophe, the volcanic eruption of Thera, which generated massive tsunamis and may have contributed to the collapse of Minoan power. Recent archaeological discoveries have revealed that Minoan civilization was even more sophisticated than previously thought. The Minoans had developed a complex writing system, extensive trade networks throughout the Mediterranean, and advanced technologies including flush toilets, paved roads, and multi-story buildings with sophisticated ventilation systems. They also appear to have been remarkably peaceful, with little evidence of warfare or military fortifications in their major cities. However, the Minoan theory still cannot fully account for the specific details of Plato's account. The scale is wrong. Crete is much smaller than the continent-sized Atlantis that Plato described. The location is wrong. Crete is in the Mediterranean, not beyond the Pillars of Hercules, and the timeline is wrong. The Minoan civilization flourished around 2700 to 1450 BCE, not 9600 BCE as Plato specified. Some researchers have attempted to address these problems by suggesting that Plato may have been drawing on multiple sources, combining memories of different civilizations into a single narrative. According to this interpretation, Atlantis might represent a composite of several real historical civilizations, including the Minoans, the Sea Peoples, who devastated the eastern Mediterranean around 1200 BCE, and various other prehistoric cultures. This composite theory has the advantage of being more flexible than theories that try to identify Atlantis with a single historical civilization. It acknowledges that Plato may have been using creative license in constructing his narrative while still allowing for the possibility that the story contains kernels of historical truth. However, it also makes the theory much more difficult to test or verify, since almost any ancient civilization could potentially be incorporated into the composite. Another approach to the Atlantis mystery focuses on the possibility that Plato was describing a real place but got some of the details wrong due to errors in transmission or translation. This theory suggests that the Egyptian priests who supposedly told the story to Solon may have made mistakes in converting Egyptian measurements and chronologies into Greek equivalents. The mistranslation theory proposes that Plato's figure of 9,000 years should actually be interpreted as 900 years, which would place Atlantis around 1300 BCE rather than 9600 BCE. This would put the time frame much closer to known historical catastrophes like the Thera eruption and the collapse of several Bronze Age civilizations. Similarly, some researchers have suggested that Plato's description of Atlantis as being larger than Libya and Asia combined might be a mistranslation or exaggeration of the original Egyptian account. While the mistranslation theory addresses some of the chronological problems with the Atlantis story, it creates new difficulties. If the story underwent such significant changes during transmission, how can we determine which elements are accurate and which are corrupted? And why would Plato, who was presumably intelligent enough to notice obvious inconsistencies, have preserved these errors in his dialogues? Some of the most creative alternative theories have proposed that Atlantis might have been located in completely unexpected places. The Celtic Atlantis theory suggests that the civilization was located in ancient Ireland or Britain, drawing on similarities between Celtic mythology and Plato's account. The Black Sea theory proposes that Atlantis was situated in what is now the Black Sea before the catastrophic flooding that may have occurred around 5600 BC. Other theories have placed Atlantis in the North Sea, identifying it with Doggerland, the Indian Ocean connecting it to legends of Lemuria, or even in the Pacific Ocean linking it to Easter Island or other Polynesian cultures. Each of these theories has its proponents and can point to certain pieces of evidence that seem to support their interpretation. However, most of these alternative location theories suffer from the same fundamental problems. They require significant modifications to Plato's account to make the theory work. They lack convincing archaeological evidence, and they often rely on superficial cultural similarities that can be explained by other means. Recent decades have seen the emergence of more sophisticated approaches to the Atlantis mystery that attempt to combine multiple lines of evidence. Some researchers have used computer modeling to simulate sea level changes and climate variations during the period when Atlantis supposedly existed, identifying areas where advanced civilizations might have flourished before being destroyed by environmental changes. Others have focused on analyzing the literary and philosophical context of Plato's dialogues, attempting to determine how much of the Atlantis story was intended as historical fact versus philosophical allegory. This approach has revealed interesting patterns in Plato's use of historical examples and has provided new insights into his political and social theories. Advanced statistical analysis has also been applied to the problem, comparing the specific details of Plato's account with known historical civilizations to determine which real cultures show the strongest parallels with Atlantis. While these studies have identified several interesting correlations, none have provided conclusive evidence for a specific historical basis for the story. The proliferation of alternative theories and interpretations reflects both the enduring fascination with Atlantis and the fundamental ambiguity of Plato's account. The story contains enough specific details to seem historically plausible, but these details are often contradictory or inconsistent with known facts about the ancient world. This has created a situation where almost any interpretation seems possible, if one is willing to modify or reinterpret certain aspects of the narrative. As we'll explore in the final chapter, this ambiguity may be precisely the point. Rather than seeking to identify a specific historical basis for Atlantis, it may be more productive to consider what the enduring appeal of the story reveals about human nature and our relationship with the past. After examining the evidence from multiple angles, archaeology, geology, ancient history, and literary analysis, we arrive at the central question: was Atlantis real, or is it simply one of history's most compelling fictional narratives? The answer, like many complex historical questions, is not entirely straightforward, but the weight of evidence points strongly in one direction. The most important factor to consider is the complete absence of corroborating evidence from other ancient sources. If Atlantis had been the powerful maritime empire that Plato described, controlling territories throughout the Mediterranean and threatening the ancient world, it would almost certainly have been mentioned by other ancient historians and chroniclers. The Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, and other literate civilizations of the ancient world were meticulous record keepers who documented their encounters with foreign powers, both friendly and hostile. Yet outside of Plato's dialogues, there is no mention of Atlantis in any ancient source. This silence is particularly telling when we consider that Plato's student Aristotle, who had access to the same educational resources and historical traditions, was openly skeptical of the Atlantis story. If there had been independent evidence for such a civilization, Aristotle would have been likely to know about it. The archaeological evidence is equally problematic for the literal interpretation of Atlantis. Despite more than a century of searching using increasingly sophisticated technology, no unambiguous archaeological evidence has been found that corresponds to Plato's description. While numerous underwater sites have been discovered and investigated, none show the characteristics that would be expected from the advanced civilization described in the Timaeus and Critias. This lack of archaeological evidence is particularly significant because we do have extensive archaeological records from the time period when Atlantis supposedly existed. The Mediterranean world of the 2nd millennium BCE is well documented through excavations at sites like Troy, Mycenae, Naxos, and numerous other locations. These sites have provided detailed insights into Bronze Age civilizations, their technologies, trade networks, and interactions with one another. If Atlantis had existed as Plato described, we would expect to find evidence of its influence in the archaeological record of contemporary civilizations. Advanced metallurgy, sophisticated engineering techniques, or distinctive artistic styles should have spread from Atlantis to other cultures through trade and cultural exchange. Yet no such evidence has been identified. The geological evidence, while demonstrating that catastrophic events capable of destroying civilizations have indeed occurred throughout history, does not support the specific scenario described by Plato. The locations where Atlantis is traditionally placed, particularly in the Atlantic Ocean beyond the Pillars of Hercules, show no geological evidence of recent large-scale land subsidence or volcanic activity that could have caused an island continent to disappear. More fundamentally, the scale of the destruction described by Plato would have left unmistakable geological signatures that should still be detectable today. The sudden submersion of a landmass larger than Libya and Asia combined would have generated massive tsunamis, altered ocean circulation patterns, and deposited distinctive sediment layers across a wide area. No such evidence has been found. The chronological problems with Plato's account are equally insurmountable. Placing Atlantis at 9600 BCE puts it in the Neolithic period, when human societies were still primarily organized as small-scale hunter-gatherer groups. While recent discoveries like Göbekli Tepe have shown that Neolithic peoples were capable of more sophisticated achievements than previously thought, nothing in the archaeological record suggests the existence of the kind of advanced maritime empire that Plato described. The social and technological requirements for such a civilization would have been enormous. Building the circular city that Plato described, with its massive harbors and sophisticated infrastructure, would have required coordinated labor from thousands of workers, advanced engineering knowledge, and sophisticated organizational systems. Maintaining a powerful navy capable of threatening distant civilizations would have required not only shipbuilding technology, but also the social institutions necessary to support professional military forces. Perhaps most tellingly, there is no evidence in the archaeological record for the gradual development of the technologies and social institutions that would have been necessary for Atlantis to exist. Complex civilizations don't appear suddenly. They develop gradually over centuries or millennia, building on earlier achievements and innovations. The archaeological record shows this gradual development clearly in regions like Mesopotamia and Egypt. But there is no comparable developmental sequence that could have led to Atlantis. When we examine Plato's account from a literary and philosophical perspective, the case for interpreting Atlantis as fiction becomes even stronger. The story serves clear philosophical purposes within the broader context of Plato's work, illustrating his ideas about ideal governance, the corruption of power, and the relationship between individual virtue and social justice. The timing of the dialogues is also significant. Plato was writing during a period of Athenian decline, following the city's defeat in the Peloponnesian War and during the planning of the disastrous Sicilian expedition. The parallels between Atlantis' imperial overreach and Athens' own military ambitions would have been obvious to contemporary readers. The story functions as a cautionary tale about the dangers of hubris and the importance of maintaining moral virtue in the face of power and prosperity. Plato's use of the Atlantis story also demonstrates his sophisticated understanding of how to construct compelling narratives that would resonate with his audience. By presenting the story as ancient history passed down through respected sources like Solon and the Egyptian priests, Plato gave his fictional narrative the authority and gravitas necessary to make his philosophical points effectively. This doesn't mean that Plato created the story entirely from imagination. Like many skilled writers, he likely drew inspiration from real historical events and places. The memory of Bronze Age catastrophes, the impressive ruins of earlier civilizations, and contemporary knowledge of distant lands could all have contributed elements to his narrative. The volcanic destruction of Thera and its impact on Minoan civilization provides the most plausible historical kernel for the Atlantis story. The scale of this catastrophe, the advanced nature of Minoan civilization, and the maritime setting all provide parallels with Plato's account, even though the chronology and geography don't match exactly. Similarly, Plato may have drawn inspiration from accounts of other advanced prehistoric civilizations that were known to exist but were poorly understood in his time. The megalithic monuments of Western Europe, the sophisticated astronomical observations of various ancient cultures, and reports of distant civilizations encountered by Greek traders could all have contributed to his vision of a lost golden age. However, the fact that Plato may have drawn inspiration from real sources doesn't make Atlantis itself historically real. Writers throughout history have created compelling fictional narratives by combining and transforming real elements in creative ways. The skill with which Plato constructed his narrative is evidence of his literary genius, not proof of its historical accuracy. The enduring appeal of the Atlantis story reflects something deeper about human psychology and our relationship with the past. The idea of a lost golden age, a perfect civilization that existed before the corruptions and compromises of the present world, appears in cultures throughout history. These stories serve important psychological and social functions, providing ideals to aspire to and cautionary examples of what can be lost through moral failure. Atlantis has become a particularly powerful version of this universal myth because of its specific characteristics. It's advanced enough to seem plausible in light of modern technology, mysterious enough to fuel speculation and imagination, and morally instructive enough to provide meaningful lessons about human nature and society. The search for Atlantis has also served important functions for the development of archaeology and related sciences. The desire to find evidence of lost civilizations has motivated exploration of previously unknown regions, development of new technologies for underwater research, and interdisciplinary collaboration between archaeologists, geologists, and other scientists. Even though these searches have not found Atlantis, they have led to remarkable discoveries about genuine prehistoric civilizations. The underwater archaeology techniques developed for Atlantis research have been used to discover and study important historical sites like Thonis Heraclean and Atlantium, The geological research inspired by Atlantis theories has improved our understanding of sea level changes, catastrophic events, and their impacts on human societies. In this sense, the Atlantis story has been productive for human knowledge, even though the civilization itself appears to be fictional. The search has pushed the boundaries of what we know about the prehistoric world, and has demonstrated the remarkable achievements of ancient peoples, even if those achievements don't match Plato's specific description. Looking toward the future, it's unlikely that new evidence will emerge to validate the literal existence of Atlantis as Plato described it. The most promising areas for discovering new prehistoric civilizations are underwater sites that were submerged by post-glacial sea level rise. However, these sites would be much older than Plato's Atlantis, and would show the characteristics of Paleolithic or early Neolithic societies, rather than the advanced Bronze Age civilization described in the dialogues. Advanced remote sensing technologies, improved underwater archaeology techniques, and better understanding of prehistoric climate and geology will undoubtedly lead to new discoveries about ancient civilizations. Some of these discoveries may be remarkable enough to capture public imagination in ways similar to Atlantis. However, they are likely to reveal the genuine complexity and sophistication of real prehistoric cultures rather than validating fictional narratives. The most constructive approach to the Atlantis mystery is to appreciate the story for what it most likely is: a masterful work of philosophical fiction that has inspired centuries of scientific research and cultural creativity. Plato's achievement was not in preserving the memory of a real lost civilization, but in creating a narrative so compelling and multifaceted that it continues to resonate with readers over to millennia after it was written. This interpretation doesn't diminish the value or importance of the Atlantis story. Great literature has always served multiple functions: entertaining readers, exploring important themes, and inspiring people to think about fundamental questions of human existence. By these measures, the Atlantis story is one of the most successful literary creations in human history. The search for Atlantis has also demonstrated the importance of maintaining rigorous standards of evidence when investigating claims about the past. The numerous false discoveries and speculative theories that have surrounded Atlantis research serve as cautionary examples of what happens when enthusiasm and imagination are not balanced by careful analysis and skeptical evaluation. At the same time, the Atlantis story reminds us that the past was far more complex and interesting than we often assume. Real prehistoric civilizations achieved remarkable things with limited technology and resources. Real catastrophic events shaped human history in dramatic ways. Real mysteries remain to be solved about how our ancestors lived, what they accomplished, and how their societies developed and sometimes collapsed. In the end, the greatest value of the Atlantis story may be its ability to inspire wonder about the past and curiosity about what remains to be discovered, whether or not Plato's island civilization ever existed. The human story is full of remarkable achievements, mysterious disappearances, and dramatic transformations that rival anything in fiction. The search for Atlantis has taught us that while we may never find Plato's perfect island, the real world contains wonders that are just as fascinating and far more meaningful because they represent the actual achievements of our ancestors. In seeking Atlantis, we have discovered not a fictional utopia, but something far more valuable: a deeper appreciation for the complexity, creativity, and resilience of human civilization itself. As we conclude our investigation, the evidence points clearly to Atlantis being a work of philosophical fiction rather than historical fact. But this conclusion doesn't end the story. Instead, it opens up new questions about why certain narratives capture our imagination so powerfully, how fiction and reality interact in shaping our understanding of the past, and what the enduring appeal of lost civilizations reveals about our hopes and fears for the future. The lost city of Atlantis may be fiction, but the human quest for understanding, meaning, and connection with our past is undeniably real. And in that quest, both the failures and successes of the search for Atlantis have contributed to our growing knowledge of who we are and where we came from. Perhaps that is the most valuable treasure that the legendary lost civilization has given us. Not gold or advanced technology, but wisdom about the nature of human curiosity and the power of great storytelling to inspire scientific discovery and cultural reflection across the centuries. In our modern age of rapid technological advancement and global connectivity, the Atlantis story serves as a reminder that some mysteries may be more valuable for the questions they inspire than for the answers they provide. The search for Atlantis continues not because we expect to find Plato's island, but because that search connects us to fundamental questions about human achievement, moral responsibility, and our relationship with the natural world that remain as relevant today as they were in ancient Athens over 2,000 years ago.